She's an assistant professor at the Department of Art Theory and History at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Brno University of Technology. She has served as a curator of public programs at the Gallery of the City of Bratislava, the residency program at Meat Factory and at Pradelna Bohnice, an art space and gallery located within psychiatric hospital in the outskirts of Prague. She has also worked with Display, an association focused on research and collective practice in Prague. And also I would like to, of course, you all know the work of Eva Kmentová, and that's why you are here today. But let me just remind you that she's one of the Czechoslovakia's most prolific and renewed female sculptors, lived for many years with several chronic conditions that deeply influence both her work and life. So once again, thank you for being here today and for listening to this very interesting presentation. Thank you, Zuzana.
Things first, thank you for coming and listening to this take on Eva Kmentová's life. I have to tell you, I'm not an art historian. I'm a curator of contemporary art, mostly, and I work in university and so on, and do research in disability studies and art and histories of curating and so on. And I got invited to this to do this research by an art historian, Tomáš Pospíšil, who works in the Academy of Fine Arts in Prague, and he was doing a research on Eva Kmentová. He's been doing a research on Eva Kmentová for the past 20 years. But he wanted to make a big exhibition that would kind of reevaluate some of Kmentová's life and work. And he knew that I was working in the field of disability studies and looking at art and contemporary art from these perspectives. And he thought, you know, Eva Kmentová, she's lived for a big or like a substantial part of her life with this chronic illness. And is there a way that we reevaluate her work through this lens? How do we look at what she was doing towards the end of her life through this lens? And the resulting text, or parts of it you're going to hear, the kind of the results of the research. But I wanted to send you this. This is the book that we published, and that partly also serves as a catalog accompanying an exhibition that Tomáš Pospíšil did in the House of Arts in Brno. It's simply entitled Eva, and sadly it's Czech only, but you will hear kind of the shortened English version here. I will try and show you Eva Kmentová. Eva Kmentová, as was already said, is one of the most prolific and renowned artists in Czechoslovakia's modern history, and she's been getting a lot of attention because also there's been a lot of feminist scholarship, a lot of looking at a lot of rewriting of contemporary art histories and art histories as such, through feminist lens and through just looking for women. And Eva Kmentová, for many years, although many people say that her work is more interesting, or at least as interesting as her husband's Olbram Zoubek, who was a famous and very important, who is a very important Czech sculptor, she didn't get as much exposure as she maybe would have. And you know, you've probably seen a lot of interesting women that have come out of female sculptors and female artists that have come out of the region of Central Eastern Europe recently, from the generation of Eva Kmentová, Alina Šapučníkov, Eva Hesse, Maria Bartusová, and so on. So this is Eva Kmentová with her work, so that you also see what she looked like. She was born in 1928 and she passed in 1980, where she was only 52 years old, due to a long illness that I will also, of course, talk about. This is Eva Kmentová sitting in front of a spa building in Františkovy Lázně, which is in a spa town in Czech Republic. It's really interesting also maybe why do we talk about, or why do we try to evaluate this work from a perspective of disability studies now. There has been an increasing interest in disability studies perspectives in contemporary, art, curating, and so on. The curator Barbara Munoz Rodriguez even calls it turn to health. And among other things, it is accompanied by questioning and critically kind of rethinking artistic representations of illness and disability in contemporary art and historical art, and by new perspectives on the lives and work of disabled artists living with illness, chronic illness, etc. It is really interesting when you take a look at how art history has been looking for decades, or maybe centuries, decades mostly, or centuries at illness. It's really interesting to see how different kinds of ableist narratives were kind of inscribed into the way we look at art and artists living with disability or working with chronic illness. So disabled artists often have been, exoticized. They were portrayed either as super crip, so exceptionally gifted, geniuses capable of, whatever kind of non-standard creativity due to or in spite of their disability. Think of Van Gogh, or whatever interesting artists we can think of that had a certain kind of disability. And similarly, this was the case with kind of interpretations of severe illness or acquired disability. And they were often perceived as either something that radically interfered with creativity and consequently stood in the way of full artistic expression, or as something that deepened that expression and gave it almost an existential dimension. Many of these interpretations, of course, are also related to the notions of illness as an adversity that the artist copes with, and through their heroic efforts, also mostly through work, or to extensive regret that the artist is unable to work fully because of their illness. You will see this as I talk. You will see how it related to, or how it how Eva Kmentová's work was read through art history with a lot of ableist narratives. These narratives also are then mirrored in the reflection of the artist's death due to illness, which is usually premature, or leaving the artist with an unfinished or violently ended oeuvre. So those are kind of narratives that surround often the interpretation of art by the artists that live with disability or illness. So Eva Kmentová, let's get to her. She died in the spring of 1980 from complications associated with prolonged liver inflammation. She first, or the illness first appeared by mid-70s, but mid-1970s, and she was then in her mid-40s, so a young woman. Kmentová, she was at that point an established artist. She was, she had a number of international and domestic exhibitions, a lot of realizations in public space that you will see, and architecture. Her work was respected, reflected, and exhibited by prominent art critics and commissioners of the time. So, it's not that she was an invisible artist at all. She was really kind of exhibiting and in visible, well-known, etc. Many art historians, I'm going to show you at least, the basic work of Eva Kmentová, so that you get the gist of how she was working. So she was working oftentimes with casting her own body. So on the left you see palms that you will see throughout the kind of talk, or this is kind of life-size casting of her own body. So she would be really kind of looking at touch. She would be looking at the way the body behaves as not as a sculptural form in kind of representation only, but how it relates to the real body of the artist. This is a very famous one by Eva Kmentová, which is really one of the most kind of famous art pieces, entitled The Human Egg, from the late 60s, where this is actually a plaster cast that she kind of crawled into You can see kind of her legs and body that have been plastered, kind of, or yeah, she was in the egg. That's that's the easy way to put it. But this is it's Kmentová throughout her work has used a lot of different kinds of materials, but a lot of it was fragile. A lot of it would be falling apart. A lot of you'll see throughout. She would work with concrete, with plaster, also with bronze, but kind of increasingly with these like softer materials. This is some of her realizations in public space. These sculptures and things that they've done with her husband, both in public space, was also due to the politics of allocating some percentage of money to newly built projects for public art. So this is a leaf, unfolding leaf. It's called this art piece, or this is a very famous one that's still on. These are still kind of existing today. This was a realist, like a whole wall through 2 floors, that's still to be seen in Brno, and it was a cybernetic, like a building of cybernetics department in Brno. So this is now a cafe. If you ever want to go to Brno and to a cafe to look at Kmentová's work, yeah. But you can at least see what we are talking about with her work. Maybe let's stay here for a while. You know, it's interesting that even though when Eva Kmentová died, it was really, like, a lot of the art scene was really sad about it, because she's been very well connected. She was evidently very well liked, not only on a level of being an artist, but also as a person. But she, many of the art historians that then later somehow evaluated her oeuvre, or people that were around her at that time, would not reflect on the illness as much. They would either pretend it never happened, or would be too sentimental, or wouldn't even read it within her, or wouldn't read the art through the illness. I will read you a few examples. Very often if someone would be talking about it, they would be like talking about how brave Kmentová is to overcome the illness. For example, I'm gonna read an example by art historian Ludmila Vachtová. She describes Eva Kmentová's relationship to her own work during her illness as follows. The diagnosis starts with a history of uncured jaundice. The more miserable she gets, the more energy Eva can mobilize without forcing it. She doesn't retort, she looks, she draws, she thinks. Quietly and defiantly, she creates the luxury of lightness. This is a really interesting way to think about Kmentová's work in relation to her illness, because when you read extensive correspondence and archival materials, you can see that this is absolutely not how Eva Kmentová thought about herself in illness. On the contrary, curator and art historian Marek Klimešová, who also devoted a big part of her research to Eva Kmentová, she doesn't even mention her illness at all. In the catalog text for the exhibition that the artist did at North Bohemian Gallery of Fine Arts in Litoměřice, which was kind of one of the first big exhibitions that have been done post-mortem for Eva Kmentová. She only refers to it once in a short note about the author's progressive physical weakening. So, you know, kind of invisibilizing the illness. Some contemporary criticism emphasizes the role of illness in the significance of the artist's work as a whole. So on the other hand, they kind of some people were like, thanks to the illness, you know, she was even creating even deeper art. So for example, art critic Jindřich Chalupecký, one of the most kind of renowned critics and creators of the time, reflects on her work mostly from this kind of existentially glorifying position, saying, Evička's understandings. For those of you who don't speak Czech, Eva is the name of the artist. She's called Eva, like I'm called Zuzana. But when someone says Evička, it's kind of this diminutive a version of the name that you would kind of have to be very familiar with someone in order to call them Evička. And he's writing this in one catalog text, so it's just an interesting kind of side note. So Evička's understanding of everything was so self-evident that only when faced with the threat of illness and loss of her life did we glimpse her human and artistic features in the true light of irreplaceable beauty, as if reality had suddenly been illuminated by a new spotlight under whose rays the gray tones light up into colors, unsuspected and unexpected colors behind whose harmony one can glimpse the special deep sense of human destiny. So kind of, this transcendental, she through her illness saw behind them, behind the windows of life, or I don't know. Of course, like a lot of these reflections were written kind of when Eva Kmentová was passed away. So there's a deep sadness, a deep grief and bereavement within those, in the way that her friends kind of related to her. But it also, kind of set the tone for the way the work has been interpreted within the context of Czech art history. As opposed to this, I suggest we take a kind of look at how Eva Kmentová herself was talking about her own relationship to illness, how she was doing so through her, writing, but also through her work, which was much more nuanced and complicated, as you will see. So I'm going to show you, if I will manage to. Where am I pointing? Okay. Sorry. So human body and its shapes, as you've seen, is kind of like from the at the beginning, and the transformations of that body are one of the really among the most important themes of Eva Kmentová. And corporeality and body in her work serve as a specific kind of epistemological space, we can say, a tool of getting to know the world as well as, as an image of that acquired knowledge. The body is the living space of, artist reality, as it is for every one of us, but she somehow inhabits and re-inhabits in the course of her life, but also in the course of her work. In times of illness, she, gains and loses strength. She loses, she goes through a lot of treatments, heavy treatment. She rapidly loses weight. For example, if you see me now as I am, Kmentová before her death was kind of 2/3 of my weight. So imagine. She's affected by various medications and a strict diet, but she also kind of, is reflecting on changing bodies before within her art, on making love, on having children. She, I would argue that illness is just another transformation that she has been looking at within her art, as opposed to something that just magically is now horribly, affecting her life. It is on one side also really affecting her life, but I would argue that there have been changes before, and that she's been really interested in these the transformations of body and corporeality from the onset of her work. This is for example her self-portrait from 1975, and she kind of reflects on this mutability and multiplicity of her own form. There's the outlines of her head made of pressed paper onto this kind of solid slab at different angles. She would also not only do this for herself, but she would do this, for example, for her family members. So they would have this kind of family portrait of, layered family members. But this, to me, is very specific, kind of the way she is trying to, at the onset of her illness, trying to understand what is happening to her in this multitude of, multitude of selves that she needs to kind of hold together. Many of the artist's works, particularly from the late 60s, are an amalgam of her physical body and sculptural material, imprints of her skin, her hair. How am I supposed to do this? Okay, sorry, I'm trying. So imprints of skin, hair, wrinkles, and pores kind of co-create the materiality of the work, and somehow also support the idea of recording this bodily mutability. So this belly, for example, is a huge sculpture. This is, so much bigger than maybe this, it's a large scale kind of piece that she casted, and this is the original kind of cast that she did from her own body, but she then like multiplied it, and this was actually looked like an abstract, like a huge abstract sculpture, but it was actually her belly. So this is the original one, and then she put it in architecture in a massive, massive scale. This physical imprint can be found in the iconic human egg that I showed you at the beginning, and this is also, works such as, palms or forehead. You saw these palms already. This is also something that she's been working with before, or that she's been working with throughout the whole career, that she was kind of looking at the same gesture again and again. So looking at touch and so on. To me, it's kind of interesting that she really kind of used her body as for casting in a way that, you can see in some of the more detailed pictures that there's really kind of her hair or her pieces of her body, really kind of parts of the sculpture, which is really interesting. And these are all kind of artistic records of a specific body in its time-specific form, to me. So you would see kind of the body change throughout time, and you would see that she would record a young body and then an old body without specifically, not old, she died at 52, but older. So you can see kind of that transformation in those works as well. It's interesting that a lot of the art history kind of reconsiderations of Kmentová's work were kind of saying, but at some point where she, started to become ill and she was kind of fragile and frail, she started to use paper, or she started to use lighter materials because she couldn't, do bronze casting, or for example. But I think it's not really true, because when I was looking in the archives, you could see kind of that she was doing those paper sculptures that you will still see. You could see that she was working with fragile materials before. So I would kind of argue, I would kind of argue against some art historical interpretations that that using lighter materials was only coming to Eva Kmentová as a result of illness. I think she always had a really big interest in kind of this fragility within material. And although, of course, naturally she reaches for some techniques and materials that are available to her because she really is weak in some of the moments of her illness, I think this kind of interest in continuing kind of developing techniques that are inherent to her, like drawing or some fragile techniques, have been there kind of throughout her oeuvre. She really used kind of drawing for extended periods of time throughout her own practice. This is, I wanted to just show you this. This is one of the kind of casting in bronze that she calls either rain, or sometimes the same kind of motive is called rain, and sometimes it's called crying or tears. That's also really nice. This was, if anyone wants to do some research on Eva Kmentová, I suggest you do a research on how she was kind of merging and linking the human and the non-human nature together. Wink, wink, if you feel like this research. It would be a really, really nice research. Anyways, I will show you, she worked with drawing a lot that you will still see. But this we don't need to. She's like really interested in kind of touch for a big part of her, or throughout her career, throughout her working, she's really interested in touch. We can, of course, only speculate to what extent, you know, the depictions of, you know, touch were influenced by her long stays in hospitals, where, you know, most touch is subject to a practical function, you know, washing, dressing, disinfecting, taking blood, and, you know, inserting IVs, preparing for surgery, etc. But Kmentová depicts the transformation of her body and of corporeality in relationship to touch in her 1977 series of tissue paper torsos. This is called either Unnamed or White Drawing, which combined this like subliminal erotic desire. You will see more erotic desire throughout a bit later, with kind of shame at one's bodily fragility. This is just some of them. I don't know if you see the one on your left, if it's visible. Is it? A bit. So yeah, kind of you can see that these are these kind of like very fragile like paper torsos, you know, on paper, and these are only two of a series, which is thank you, which is, yeah, I don't know if, does it help? Okay, so these are only two of them, so there's more. But the drawings kind of show the body in various positions and gestures, and with hands on the chest, also on the breasts or covering the pubic area, and the fragile kind of irregular materiality of the body can also be read in the 1979 plastic drawing, Unnamed Chest. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? Yeah. No battery. Now I see it. No battery. Yeah. So if we have any of these that has a battery, that would be great. Or if we can just, or if you can. Sorry. Teraz tam vidím, že to tak môžeme sa ešte vrátiť. Prosím, can we go back? Yeah. Can we go back to the white drawing? Yeah, here. Yes, stop. So this is the chest, also called Unnamed. Kind of, she would always like put many of the things she would, you know, entitle Unnamed and then put in the brackets kind of chest or white drawing. From which rib symbols later migrate into the subtle drawing disappearance. You don't see it here, but you see the chest. So kind of there's a repetition throughout time of some of the symbols that she's using, the palms, the rain, the, you know, etc. The chest. This is the one on the right is like is something that I scanned from a book, and one on your right is of an installation view of the exhibition that I kind of should send the catalog around. And Kmentová also returns to the representation of erotic desire in times of her illness. You will see that a bit more. A series of holes and slits. If we can click, please. Can we move? Holes and slits. Made of layered torn paper are joined 3 years later. Name drawings formally referencing the shape of the penis, as well as slits carved into paper trays in Unnamed Slit and The Great Feast, both from 1978. What is interesting here is that this one is really a paper tray, the one on the right, you know, kind of when you want to order a sausage at an Oktoberfest with mustard, so that kind of, you know, size of a tray. But the left one is a huge kind of almost like 1.50 meters. So sorry, I have no idea how to inch and feet it, but like kind of up to here. So she's also done it in like different kinds of you know, shapes and sizes. What is really interesting, this is just a side note, but if you look at this art piece, it has been only read within the context of erotica, or, you know, interpreted as potentially erotic desire, a symbol of potentially erotic desire by one curator or art historian, and she's a feminist art historian. Like really nobody looked at it this way. interesting, right? Or maybe, maybe we are, me and the other art historian should not look at so much erotic desire, but it's kind of, what is interesting also to look at, I think what is interesting in terms of the time when this is kind of happening, or when she's working on these pieces, is that she was also going through a lot of surgeries. So I think it's also interesting to look if there's a potential for like interpreting this in a context of sexuality, female sexuality, because she was always talking about her desires. When you read her writing, she was always like kind of enmeshed in some like romantic imagination. But also I think it's really interesting to look at the time when she was really in and out of hospital, and that maybe it also has to do with kind of cutting the body open. You see the slits also, these are just this, so this is really nice and interesting to see because this is really rare, but this is from the archives, and these are just like she was not only was she writing extensively, they would also have kind of like family diaries where they would write with her husband a monthly kind of sum up what was going on, but she would also have a lot of her private diaries, and then she would also have these like drawing diaries. You can see here the slits are in the context of a bed. On the left there's a torso, like a person under a blanket, and then the slits on the right. And this was also from an era where she was in and out of hospital. And this to me is just like interesting to maybe look at, but we can skip it. But she was very close to she would draw a lot of natural elements like rain, different kinds of branches and so on. But when I was looking at this, it almost also looks like it almost looks like veins. But this may be overinterpretation, but like when I was looking at kind of what was surrounding it in the archive, I was kind of like, that's kind of like a blood stream. So yeah, just this is also just to show you that much of this is to show you an example of the drawing of the way how she was actually a wonderful drawer, not this kind of drawer, but and how many of the things that many of the motives that would kind of come up in her sculpture were also present kind of throughout her drawing. And of course, Eva Kmentová was an interesting person. She was, when you read her, her correspondence from the time when she was ill, but also like generally from her correspondence, or the way she was thinking about herself, it was like deeply connected to her ability to work. And of course, what is really problematic when in the context of our societies, when we identify so closely with work, and then something like a chronic illness strikes, or you have to change, or like it changes or transforms the way we think of productivity. And chronicity specifically is operating in unpredictable cycles, bouts of intensified symptoms associated with associated illnesses. Or on the contrary, you suddenly feel, a flux of energy, and understandably, this all challenged the author's, customary way of working. And despite the fact that she produced a number of works and worked continuously during the years of her illness, she often situated work in opposition to illness. But it's really interesting because she worked so much. But she was, for example, saying, quote, "Work and normal life are again relegated to the background." So she would often kind of make these like complaints: "I cannot work because of illness, because I'm sick." For Kmentová, kind of this relationship between illness, artistic work, and life become a space of kind of constant negotiation. And they also bring a lot of kind of contradictory feelings. Yeah? So sometimes it is a source of deep frustration, sometimes of joy, routine, or even a return to oneself, often all at once. And kind of these feelings are not exclusively a reflection of the individual importance, you know, of creative work in Eva Kmentová's life, but they also reflect a larger kind of societal kind of idea of productivity. The scholar, Czech disability scholar, fantastic disability scholar, Kateřina Kolářová puts it as follows, quote, "The ways in which normative prescriptions of fitness and health continually affect each person, influencing our self-experience, identity, and social status." So, you know, it's kind of how the norm of a healthy body and a healthy mind, whatever that is, non-disabled, is a kind of norm that we always tend to go back to when we don't feel like we're kind of we're following this prescription. And you know, so it really shows how deeply these prescriptions are connected to ideas of work, engagement, and productivity. And Eva Kmentová was really fighting with this. So she often calls she often talks about impossibility to work, and I repeat, she worked so much when she was throughout her life, even when she was kind of in spa, etc. Anyways, life and health circumstances sometimes make her distrust the outcome of her own art, which is quite, you know, it's interesting to read. From Spa, for example, she sends a letter to Indřich Chalupecký, the famous curator and a friend of Kmentová, saying, quote, "I have all the things to draw here with me, but I have no desire, no mood to do anything at all. Only 3 crayon pictures right at the beginning, but they are worthless anyways." So not only is she like kind of she feels like she can't work, but she also doesn't like what she's done because she feels like it's not as good as if she were in like kind of full health, whatever that might mean. However, she kind of maintains this confidence in art as such, even though she doesn't trust her own art. Sometimes she kind of like she trusts art as such, saying, for example, quote, "Actually, perhaps only art, when you see something here and there, is pleasing, otherwise nothing." It internalizes the shame of not being productive and blames herself for not being able to work. Quote, "Since May, when I was in Karlovy Vary, which is a spa town in Czech Republic, I haven't done anything at all. And what's worse, I haven't even thought about anything or imagined anything. But when I stopped by the barn," which was the name of her studio, the barn, "last week, laid on the sofa for a bit and looked at things, I got my appetite for work back." When she's, end quote. When she's talking about anything or how she doesn't imagine anything, and anything is art. These feelings of unproductivity are often accompanied by deep melancholy. She often comments to her friends about feeling miserable, and so on. And you can see. I wanted to show you this. This has to do with something that I already mentioned, but this note says: "Moc jsem toho v životě neupracovala, většinu času jsem žila především představami neskutečných příběhů, hlavně milostných. I haven't worked that much in my life. Most of the time I was living, I was fantasizing about various stories, mostly romantic or erotic." So, you know, she herself says that, she thinks that she didn't work enough. This is some of pictures of Eva Kmentová. This is her working on one of the studios that she had, and this is in a studio that she shared with. In some period, she shared the studio with, and also work practice with her husband, Olbram Zoubek. So that's him. This is again Eva Kmentová in front of her studio a bit later in life. This is her with some art piece. This, as you can see, in the later kind of stage of her life. And this kind of, it's really interesting because these kind of feelings of heaviness and melancholy that come from like her trying to understand what is kind of going on with her body and how she should relate to herself, to the world, and so on. She did a lot of kind of art pieces that would be that were kind of going back to the myth of Sisyphus, like trying to do something but the impossibility to do that, or she would do a lot of sculptures that would be balancing, like almost impossibly balancing on one side, like a cube balancing and kind of falling. So there was this kind of like trying to find some kind of stability, also through the art. Kmentova's work also, which is really interesting, also becomes the domain of doctors, of course, who subordinate all her work activities to the idea of the most efficient treatment. Their recommendations, however, vary at different times. It's interesting to read. While at certain moments, the doctors discourage the artist from working and prescribe rest, bed rest. At other times, they recommend work, at least in a limited mode, to kind of sometimes as a prevention to marasmus, to, depression and kind of melancholia that she was suffering. So, quote, "The head doctor decided to leave the treatment at only 2 pills and said that I should try to work carefully, not too much, and without much physical exertion, that in a month's time he would see what it would do. That is, that this condition might last for years and that I would probably go crazy on the bed, which he is quite right about," end quote. So, but also these like hegemonic narratives about illness affect not only how the author experiences her subjective relationship to work, but also her social positioning as a worker, as a cultural worker. So, of course, the structurally kind of deep-rooted social stigmatization of the long-term ill, as well as the general idea of illness as something solvable, treatable, and so on, results in a return to being, that results ideally in a return to being healthy, which is clearly a myth, has a profound effect on her self-identification. For example, in 1976, only a year or 2 years into her illness, she deals with the authorities about her disability pension, but she perceives this, the status of an official stamp of being, ill as absolutely humiliating. So she says, quote, "On Tuesday, the authorities will discuss my disability pension with me, a word that is a bit morally crushing. I've thought about death in my life, but never about disability pension," end quote. So that's how humiliating this kind of, or like difficult it was for Kmentová to cope with the idea of not being normatively productive, etc. And one more chapter that I want to just talk about briefly. This is also I wanted to show you that although there's of course a lot of heaviness and in also in the way that Kmentová is kind of talking about the way she feels about her own illness. There's also so much like great funny things that you can find in the archives. I don't know if maybe I scratched it out to not talk to you for like 20 million years, but she's sending, this is like her standing in one of the on the balcony in one of the hospitals that she'd been to. And she was sending some of the correspondence that she was sending to her family is so funny. She's so funny. She was like, she got a transfusion, like blood transfusion, and she got some blood from some young medic, from a medicine student, and she writes home to her mother, I think, like, "You wouldn't believe how joyful I am because I got blood from a really young guy." And she was like this with this kind of like really witty kind of way of talking about some of the things. Like she would send some letters, which is so funny, she would send letters that would say, this letter has been disinfected, or, you know, like really funny things. Yeah, but the last thing that I want to talk to you about is kind of Kmentova's relationship to time, or how she, you know, how she temporality changed for her, maybe. Very often she kind of, in her diaries, she's reflecting on changing temporal arrangements and the adjustment that she has to kind of make to this like new sick temporalities. The tension between the time of illness and the time of health, quote unquote, is, you know, inscribed in many of her correspondence. Which is, you know, like a lot of crip theory, or when you read the critical disability theory, there's a lot of discussion of time, and also time kind of in that time is kind of built, the idea of time that we live kind of is built around the idea of a normative body and mind that are fast-paced, that you have two legs that are working, that you have a mind that works in a certain way, that you can be, you know, productive in a certain way, that you can make, you know, some things, your body can do something in a certain way and in a certain time, which the crip theorists have argued that this is a really kind of normative way, but a lot of people and a lot of bodies do not have these abilities and would need this completely otherwise. And this is what Kmentová, for example, has been often reflecting. Like her temporal needs, life rhythm, work schedule cease to kind of correspond time frames of the ableist world. Time ceases to seemingly be easy to control as it was before. She deals with this situation in, you know, different ways. Sometimes with hope, sometimes with resignation, sometimes with acceptance, sometimes with a lot of emotional pain. For example, she writes in the summer of 1976 to, joyfully, relatively, to a friend, to her friend Olga Czechova. Quote, "Time is actually a program. I live now without time, without program. It is quite strange, never known before. This situation cannot be experienced in normal life." See how she actually thinks that her life is not normal, that she's living, you know, outside of normal life. One has to be driven into it. Maybe some people can, but not me. But once one is driven into it, it is in their power to experience this special period, not merely to exist through it. Sometimes it's quite difficult, but most of the time I manage to do it. End quote. At other times, her illness progresses, and you know, there's no kind of tangible vision of a total cure, which is really depressing to her, because at the beginning of the illness she thought this is going to be an episode of something and then I'll get back to my normal life, as you see that she describes it. So sometimes she laments in correspondence, saying, quote, "Already my moaning is too long and somewhat fruitless," end quote. The experience of chronic illness requires, of course, a constant, you know, internal dialogue, and also gradual acceptance that the illness may not be temporary, but is both a reality and a long-term vision of the author's life, which is really interesting, because also, when this is just a side note, when you look at the way we kind of, the language we use when we are talking about illness, it very often has a specific temporal structure. So like prognosis, you know, how will this unfold in the future, your physical, mental state, whatever. Diagnosis, you know, what kind of box will you be assigned to through, so it has a specific kind of temporal structure to it. Chronic illness, you know, something that is expected to last long, you know, there's a kind of temporal quality to that. But with each hospitalization or spa stay, Kmentova's tolerance, of course, for the next one changes. She says, I quote, "I want to go home so badly. Somehow I'm not good here this time, and I cannot understand that I stayed here 3 years ago for 3 months, and then again for 4 months right after that. I couldn't stand it now, end quote. She's often, confined to hospital rooms with other patients for weeks or months, where she becomes one of the many ill. So, in some cases, she also deals with the problems of this ad hoc community. It must have been horrible, but it's sometimes really funny to read, because she's sometimes like, another lady was, spent the whole day moaning about toilet paper. But in some cases, she watches the death also of fellow patients. She also notes hospital rooms, drips, and empty bed in her sketchbook. For example, here you can see kind of these looks out of the window. This is from the sketchbooks. These are kind of real hospital windows. This is really kind of from the period of laying in the hospital. You can see here on the left, you can see all the beds, kind of the hospital, rooms, and also the drip on the right top corner. Is it visible? Can you see it? Yeah. So this is kind of these are some of the visual diaries that she was making in hospitals. But even outside of baths and hospitals, life, must move at a different pace. So her orientation becomes an idealized future, a time when health and normality are restored. So, for example, she writes in one of her letters, quote, "It's strange and sometimes frightening that normal life has quite disappeared from me." Again, how Kmentová is really interesting, how she really says, although she's been living for years already with the illness, how she says normal life is elsewhere. It's not now. It's not this. So how strongly she's also, believing that the normality is within health and not within illness. Normal life has quite disappeared from me. I'm basically just in and out of hospitals, spas, doctors, cooking my own diet, saving myself, not living, not working. Also, it's very often that when she's kind of talking about working and living, she's almost talking about it in exchange. And then I always end up with the illusion that things will get better and that I will still live a little. Not for a long time, maybe now, but maybe then, maybe then in the future there will be, a period without illness, the normal life restored. In the period before her death, though, she increasingly turns to the present moment. It's really interesting to read the diaries. Also, kind of, it's heavy sometimes. She writes with a sigh, but also kind of a deeper body-mind connection to kind of looking at her own cycles of chronicity. Quote, "I was also used to making plans for the future." You see, this is in direct contrast to what she was saying in the last quote, which is only a few years, there's only a few years in between. "I was also used to making plans for the future. That has changed in me now. I'm grateful for each day and what tomorrow will be. I don't think much about, I'm grateful for each day, and what tomorrow will be, I don't think much about. In fact, even when I felt my life was hanging in the balance, I wasn't even worried, just a feeling of wanting to relax already. But again, that's not the result of some philosophy, but rather the body is so mangled to zero reflection." So kind of, this is really towards the end of her life where she's physically exhausted. She perceives and names the fluidity and changeability of time. It's quite interesting also the way she does it. She says, for example, quote, "The nurse who literally saved my life said, 'When you're sick, think of the clouds.' When you're sick," in Czech, it's maybe not a good translation. It was when you're not feeling well. "Think of the clouds, they will come and go. And I like that a lot, and sometimes I remind myself of it." End quote. So she is really able to accept the present moment and kind of passing of time. But towards the end of her life, Kmentová writes in a really reconciled way, and I would like to end there, and we can have a conversation if you feel like it. But it's a really nice quote. She says, quote, I've come to terms somewhat bitterly and heavily with the fact that I will either do nothing more or very little. This nothing, something, anything, work, always work. So I will do nothing more or very little. Though I would have liked to do so much more. Too bad. But again, it was a nice life to live, albeit a shorter one, but a nice one. So we can also just take a look at the rest of the pictures that I have here. This is also from kind of what I was kind of telling. At the end of her life, she was like looking at these Sisyphos, Krychle pro Sisypha, what is the name of this shape? Cube. Thank you. The cube for Sisyphos. So kind of the impossibility of Sisyphos to work with it, because this is an impossible shape to carry, these kinds of like figures laying on the ground. What am I supposed to do with this? To tam zas. Wow. Sorry. I should be clicking. I'm apparently becoming old. Or maybe, yeah. Môžeme sa vrátiť iba prosím tie 4 nejaké ešte kroky naspäť? Yeah, can we? No, let's move a bit further down. Keby kľudne smerom ku koncu tej prezentácie, môžeme? Tu, áno, ešte ten jeden. So this is really the kind of one of the last drawings. You can see this 79, and you see that this is kind of we can think of it as a grave, but also she was kind of she was calling it the empty place or empty space. And she would, towards the end of her life, she would very often draw these windows, as you saw already in her like hospital diaries. She would often like kind of look out of the window, and that was the connection to the world somehow. But towards the real kind of end of her life, she would also be drawing these kinds of like window frames where something kind of is coming at her. Something that would be, on the left you can see that it's a part of kind of actually quite peaceful nature, and with, some space left, but sometimes it would be this kind of overwhelming natural element. But you can see that kind of those elements again are, coming back through the work. A ešte môžem poprosiť jeden posledný klik. And this is just a kind of a last picture that I have. This is from the exhibition Eva, that from the catalog. The catalog is kind of from this show. And one thing that she was doing towards the end of her life was she was writing these words, various kinds of words that would be like yes, no, why. And this is one of her last whys, but it's also kind of, I think it's also interesting the way the architect kind of did this. And I'm not sure how much I agree, but like this is a reconstruction of Eva Kmentová's window that she had in her studios. This is kind of real life translation into the space of the exhibition. So this was one last window for Eva Kmentová. Yeah. Sorry for me not being able to do the clicking so much. Yeah.